Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Pause with Prudence. I'm so glad you're here. Pause with Prudence is a space for quiet reflection, for honest questions, and for those who may be standing on the edges of faith, still drawn to the sacred, still longing for meaning, but perhaps unsure how to talk about it anymore. I hope you will find a place here to breathe. Today, I want to explore a question that many thoughtful people are wrestling with, and that is, why do Christians today sometimes live so differently than the teachings of Jesus they say they follow? This isn't a question meant to judge. It's a question meant to invite, inviting us to learn the ways of Jesus, inviting us into honesty and humility and spiritual clarity. It's pretty obvious that our inward belief system dictates our outward behavior. For instance, if you were taught to be prejudiced, it will be very easy for you to eliminate and cancel people from your life. This can be true sometimes without being aware of it. But Jesus taught something very different, something more life-giving, more freeing, more compassionate. But we often slip into something more rigid and reactive, anxious and judgmental. Not because we're bad people, but because we're human. And often, sometimes we have learned from our upbringing. We get distracted. We live on autopilot and are unaware of the disconnects and the misrepresentations in our inner life that cause us not to represent our leader, Jesus. I want to specifically talk today about how our inner disconnects cause outward actions that keep the world from seeing the real Jesus. So I'm simply going to ask you to pause 8 times, considering 8 disconnects, then asking you a question, to take a soft pause and ask you to look with gentle eyes at anything you might observe. I say gentle eyes, which means with no judgment, just noticing and observing. Let me first admit that as I was preparing this episode, I had to stop and take a pause with myself, Prudence. Sometimes when I talk to others about what could or should be, it puts me in touch with my own heart. So with humility, I present these things to you. Pause number 1. The disconnect between loving people and trying to win an argument. Jesus' way was built on love, not winning, not being right, not defending doctrine, but love. Jesus listened, he asked questions, he never humiliated anyone or crushed them with his certainty. In fact, he often reprimanded those who felt that they were certain and judging. And today, we're living in a climate that is emotionally reactive and argument-centered. We argue on social media. We're divided over political issues. We sometimes think our mission is to defend God as though God needs protection. We act as if everything is certain beyond any doubt and that we have the only truth. Jesus didn't try to defend truth with debate. He embodied truth with his life and with compassion. So let's pause and reflect for a moment. In fact, after each pause, maybe you'll want to hit pause and reflect for as long as you desire before resuming the podcast. Where in your life have you valued being right more than being kind? This question really touches me because my personality delights in being right. Pause 2. The disconnect between welcoming outsiders instead of creating insider groups. Jesus spent his life with people on the margins, the wounded, the doubters, the lonely, the spiritually hungry, the sinner, as the religious would call them. He never shamed those who questioned. He never excluded those who wrestled with their beliefs. But today, the church in some cases have become a social club, and people who are questioning or deconstructing their faith often feel unsafe and even unwanted. Yet Jesus made questioning a doorway to deeper faith. He was probably the most profound question asker ever, and it seemed many of his questions related to how we often categorize people and make our group the right group. So let's pause again. I ask you this question. Where have you closed doors on people, the outsider, so to speak, that Jesus would have opened or kept open? Pause 3. The disconnect between showing compassionate care for the vulnerable instead of personal comfort and consumption. Jesus placed the poor, the grieving, the forgotten at the center of his kingdom. Read the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, and you'll see what I mean. He taught that spirituality is measured not by sermons or rituals or Sunday morning experiences, but by how we see and treat the least among us. But it seems that today's Christianity often values comfort over compassion, convenience over sacrifice, buildings over people, self-image over substance. Not because we don't care, but because we live in a culture that trains us in self-protection. So let's pause again, and I ask you, do your choices reflect the heart of Jesus toward the vulnerable and the weak, or are they inconvenient to you? Pause 4. The disconnect that allows authentic inner transformation to show instead of outward religious performance. Jesus was never impressed with appearances. He never said, "Do religious things so people will think you're holy." He was interested in what was happening in the heart. But today, many Christians go to church on Sunday to perform their spirituality. Sometimes this is to hide their doubts, their fears, their questions, hiding what is really going on inside of them. Jesus doesn't need our performance. He desires our honesty. So let me ask, do you feel pressure to look spiritual and religious instead of being honest? Do you have a place for your honesty? Pause 5. The disconnect that demonstrates presence, slowness, and peace instead of being anxious and busy. Jesus moved slowly. He lived in the present moment. He paused often. He withdrew to quiet spaces. He modeled rhythm. But today Christians often live just as hurried and anxious as the surrounding culture, sometimes even more. Christians are sometimes the only people in my life that are anxious and worrisome. That makes no sense to me. Faith seems to become one more task in their already overloaded life. Yet Jesus said, "Come to me, learn the unforced rhythms of life, and I will give you rest." So again, I ask you, where have you allowed hurry and worry to steal your peace? From where are you drawing your source of peace? Is it God or your circumstances? Pause 6. The disconnect of refusing power and control and not chasing influence. Jesus consistently rejected political power, religious control, and the temptation to dominate. He washed feet. He chose humility over status. He laid down his life rather than to defend himself. But it seems modern Christianity has become entangled in influence and images, politics, and platforms. Not because people are evil, but because fear convinces us that power and influence keep us safe. But Jesus said he gives grace to the humble and he blesses the meek. So let me ask, where might you be seeking power and influence and letting fear shape your faith more than trust? Pause 7. The disconnect between practicing radical forgiveness rather than holding on to quiet resentment. Forgiveness in Jesus' life was quick, costly, and restorative. Forgiveness in most people's lives, including Christians, is conditional, slow, and more like tolerating rather than reconciling. Jesus forgave from the cross, and we seem to struggle to forgive from the pew. Jesus also said that as we forgive others, He will forgive us. Remember, forgiveness is not saying what others have done to hurt you is right, and sometimes boundaries are necessary in relationship. But that still does not keep us from forgiving. Unforgiveness only hurts us, not the other. We need to have a forgiving attitude every day. So let's pause, and I ask, where are you holding back forgiveness from something or someone that needs it? Pause 8. The disconnect of desiring unity instead of delighting in division. This one is difficult sometimes. It's hard to practice belonging and unity without sameness. But healthy relationships must learn to allow space for differences, mystery, growth, and tension. Acceptance does not mean I agree with you. Acceptance means I choose to treat you with respect and kindness even when we see things differently. That's actually the soil where trust can grow again. Jesus' final prayer was that they may be one. Our modern Christian pattern is churches dividing over secondary doctrines, denominations splitting, politics, and people canceling each other instead of reconciling. Agreeing to disagree is one of the hardest things to do. But Jesus built a community, not camps. So let me ask, where are you holding on to division that might be keeping you from unity with someone or something? Can you be acceptant without agreement? Like I said before, this is very hard, and it's difficult for me too. So as I close, here's the invitation. Not guilt, not shame, not condemnation. Just awareness and noticing. Awareness and noticing what might be true of you and me. This is the doorway to transformation and things changing for us. We don't become more like Jesus through pressure or perfectionism or fear or even trying. We become more like Jesus by pausing long enough to see where we've drifted and then gently return to His ways. Jesus never said, try harder. He simply said, follow me. Not follow my rules, not follow my religion, not even my tribe. He said, follow me, my ways, my heart, my presence. So for the next few days, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus and have a desire to live more like Jesus lived, then let this question gently be in the background of your mind. Where and how are you invited to possibly relearn and return to the heart of Jesus? This may take some unlearning as well. I know it has for me. So until next time, thank you for pausing with me today. If this conversation stirred something in you, if it made you curious, if it gave you some space to breathe, I'd love to walk this journey with you. You can write me at pausewithprudence.com, and I will attempt to answer you. Even if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear your opinion. If you want a summary of this episode and would like to review the 8 disconnects, go to www.pausewithprudence.com for a downloadable pause page. So until next time, I invite you just once today to pause, to be present, to breathe, and to listen to that gentle voice of the one who loves you more than you know.